"Captain Finch, get your ass up here. Now!" The words, sharp and venomous, sliced through the tranquil cabin hum. Chloe's voice, usually a syrupy melody of welcome and safety instructions, was a shard of glass over the intercom. 184 passengers, cocooned in their digital worlds, looked up as one. A collective ripple of unease. Something was wrong in the hushed sanctuary of first class. Terribly wrong. If you've ever felt the silent, crushing weight of a room full of eyes on you, if you've ever been judged by a jury of strangers before you've even spoken a word, then you know the storm that was brewing on Apex Air Flight 718. Before we dissect the anatomy of this disaster, a disaster born from a single glance, make sure you're subscribed and have hit that notification bell. You are about to witness how an ancient, tribal instinct, the primal need to separate us from them, can ignite a multi-billion-dollar catastrophe at 30,000 feet. Julian Vance hadn't moved a muscle from seat 2A in 17 minutes. He was a statue carved from obsidian, impassive and still. He didn't flinch when Chloe, the flight attendant, had first approached, her smile as brittle as spun sugar, demanding to see his real ticket. He didn't react when her voice tightened, accusing him of fraud. He didn't even shift when other first-class passengers began to discreetly film what they presumed would be his humiliating removal. He simply sat there, a portrait of unnerving calm, occasionally glancing at the intricate face of his A. Lang & Sona timepiece. He was waiting. "Sir, you are delaying this entire aircraft," Chloe said, the tremor in her voice betraying the steel she was trying to project. "The captain is on his way." Julian finally looked up, and a smile ghosted across his lips. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile that held centuries of knowledge, the kind that made Chloe's professional composure evaporate, replaced by a cold, primal fear. "I know," he said, his voice a low, resonant baritone that seemed to absorb the ambient light. His phone vibrated softly against the armrest. A single text message from a contact labeled legal. The message was brief. Assets mobilized. "The stage is yours, sir. The stories we tell ourselves, the narratives we construct in the blink of an eye to make sense of a world that defies easy categorization. We see an expensive suit and a black man, and our minds race, pulling from a poisoned well of stereotypes and media portrayals. We build a story of suspicion, of otherness. But what happens when the real story, the one built on fact and not prejudice, shatters that comfortable fiction? Have you ever misjudged a person so profoundly, so catastrophically, that the fallout threatened to incinerate your entire world? Captain Alistair Finch appeared at the curtain dividing first class from the world of mortals. He moved like a thunderhead, his 4 gold stripes gleaming under the cabin lights, symbols of his absolute dominion in this pressurized metal tube. 25 years of flying, of wrestling multi-ton machines through treacherous skies, had distilled his professional philosophy into one simple truth. Problem passengers were like engine fires. They required immediate, decisive, and overwhelming action. "Chloe, report!" His voice was clipped, carrying the effortless weight of a man who hadn't been questioned in a quarter of a century. "This man," Chloe pointed, her finger trembling slightly at Julian. "He's been occupying a first-class seat for almost half an hour. He refuses to present a valid ID to match his ticket. He's been non-compliant and hostile." Finch's eyes, the color of a winter sky, performed a clinical scan of Julian. The suit was bespoke, Italian, probably Brioni. The posture was relaxed, hands clasped loosely in his lap. The watch was a masterpiece of German engineering that cost more than Finch's car. Nothing about the man screamed threat. But Chloe's voice was shaking, and her instincts had saved him from more than one potential disaster over the years. He trusted her. That was his first mistake. "Sir, I'm Captain Finch. I understand there's been some confusion regarding your seating." Without a word, Julian lifted his boarding pass from the seat beside him. It was printed on Apex Air's premium cardstock. Flight 7018 to Denver, Seat 2A, Julian Vance. Finch took it, his fingers brushing against the heavy, expensive paper. He scrutinized it. The font was correct. The barcode was clean. The name matched the passenger manifest he'd reviewed before boarding. Everything appeared to be in order. "This seems legitimate," Finch said, his tone shifting from authoritative to slightly uncertain. "It's a forgery," Chloe hissed, her whisper loud enough to be heard 3 rows back. The cabin had become a library of whispers and craned necks. "Captain, look at him. Really look at him. Does he look like he belongs here?" In Seat 5C, a college student named Maya adjusted the angle of her phone. Her livestream viewer count, which had been hovering at a few dozen friends, suddenly rocketed past 10,000. Comments began to flood her screen, a torrent of digital outrage. "Did she just say that? OMG, this is 2025. Apex Air is about to get canceled." Finch felt the oppressive weight of 184 pairs of eyes, amplified by thousands more in the digital ether. Mr. Davenport in 1C, a hedge fund manager with a perpetually impatient scowl, tapped his Rolex ostentatiously. The honeymooning couple in 2C were whispering furiously behind their hands. A teenager in 4A, mirroring Maya, held her phone aloft, her own live stream capturing a different angle of the unfolding drama. This was no longer a passenger dispute. It was a public spectacle. "Ma'am," Finch said, his voice dangerously low as he turned to Chloe. "I need you to clarify precisely what you meant by that statement." "You know what I mean," Chloe's voice cracked, the facade of professionalism shattering completely. A raw, ugly thing spilled out. People like him. They don't just buy and win $100 ticket. They use stolen miles, fake upgrades. He's playing a game." "People like me." Julian spoke for the first time since Finch had arrived. His voice wasn't loud, but it commanded the space, silencing the whispers. It was a voice of quiet control, layered with something cold and hard, like bedrock beneath a tranquil field. "Don't you dare twist my words," Chloe snapped, her fear now curdling into indignant rage. "I process hundreds of passengers a day. I have a sixth sense for this. I know who belongs and who is trying to cheat the system." Maya's hands were shaking as she tried to keep her phone steady. Her viewer count surged past 25,000. A hashtag had already been born. "Flying while black Apex Air." Local news affiliates were frantically sliding into her DMs, begging for permission to use her footage. The intercom crackled to life, a disembodied voice from the gate. "Final boarding call for Apex Air Flight 7018 to Denver. All passengers should be on board. 10 minutes to departure." "Sir," Finch said, his patience exhausted. This situation needed to be neutralized. "I'm going to require a secondary form of identification. A driver's license and the credit card used to purchase the ticket." Julian reached slowly into the inner pocket of his suit jacket. For a fleeting second, Finch's training kicked in, his body tensing for a sudden move. You could never be sure. But all Julian produced was a wallet. It was alligator leather, handcrafted European. He slid out a single card and placed it on the armrest. It was matte black, made of anodized titanium. The American Express Centurion card. The mythical Black Card, an object of legend that Finch had only ever read about in magazines, the kind that required an invitation, a $500,000 annual spending habit, and a joining fee that could buy a small house. Finch's confidence began to hemorrhage. This is a very exclusive card. Yes, Julian said simply. It is. That doesn't prove anything, Chloe interjected, her voice shrill. He could have stolen it. Those first-class seats are expensive. Did you pay full price or use some kind of upgrade voucher? I paid the full fare, Julian replied, his eyes locking onto Finch's. This morning, at 5:52 a.m., to be precise. A cold dread began to pool in Finch's stomach. The specificity was unnerving. Most passengers were vague about their booking details. They couldn't recall the exact time. This man spoke with the precision of a sworn deposition. 9 minutes to departure. Captain, Chloe pressed, sensing his hesitation. The other passengers are becoming agitated. They paid a premium for a peaceful, comfortable flight. This individual is making everyone deeply uncomfortable. She wasn't wrong. The atmosphere in the cabin was thick with tension, a toxic cocktail of outrage, fear, and morbid curiosity. The entire pressurized tribe was on edge. Sir, Finch made his decision. The needs of the many outweighed the rights of this one. Confusing man. I'm going to have to ask you to deplane. We can resolve this with a customer service agent at the gate. No. The word was not shouted. It was spoken quietly, yet it cut through the cabin noise like a surgeon's scalpel. It was a word of absolute, unyielding finality. Finch had heard that single syllable in that exact tone before. It was almost always followed by the sound of plastic zip ties being cinched tight. I beg your pardon? Finch said, his disbelief palpable. I said no, Captain Finch, Julian repeated, his gaze unwavering. I will not be deplaning. I will not be moving from my assigned seat. I will remain here until this aircraft arrives at its scheduled destination in Denver, Colorado. Chloe's face flushed a deep, mottled crimson. That's it. I'm calling security. You are now officially trespassing on private property. 8 minutes to departure. Chloe, make the call, Finch commanded. He had crossed the Rubicon. This man was clearly unstable, a narcissist with a penchant for high-stakes confrontation. Julian checked his watch again, the gesture now seeming less like a measure of time and more like the countdown on a bomb. The A-lung and Sona on his wrist cost more than Chloe's entire annual salary. Captain, Julian said, his voice still unnervingly calm. Before your security team arrives, I have a simple question for you. Are you familiar with Federal Aviation Regulation 9111? Finch froze. That wasn't the ramblings of a random troublemaker. That was specific, technical. It was the regulation that dealt with a pilot's authority and the potential for civil and criminal liability in interfering with interstate commerce. Sir, are you an attorney? Are you threatening me with legal action? I am merely inquiring if you comprehend the legal framework under which you are currently operating, Julian replied. Maya's livestream exploded past 50,000 viewers. The comment section was a waterfall of pure rage. He knows the law better than the pilot. This flight attendant needs to be fired. I'm an attorney watching this, and the captain is about to destroy his career. 7 minutes to departure. Finch's radio crackled. Captain Finch, this is ground control. Security is en route to your position for a passenger removal. Copy that, ground control, Finch replied, but the words felt like ash in his mouth. Something in Julian's complete lack of fear, in his surgical precision with language, was deeply unsettling. Captain, Julian said softly, almost conversationally, I believe there is some information you should have before those officers board this plane. This conversation is currently being recorded by no fewer than 15 devices, including my own. Your flight attendant has made a series of statements that constitute textbook racial profiling under both state and federal law, and in approximately 45 seconds, your personal company-issued phone is going to ring. When it does, I strongly advise you to answer it." Finch felt his mouth go dry. "What kind of call?" Julian Vance leaned back, a flicker of something akin to pity in his eyes. "The kind that ends careers, Captain. The kind that makes national headlines. The kind that forces a multi-billion-dollar corporation to its knees." As if summoned by a dark incantation, Finch's pocket began to vibrate. The caller ID was stark and terrifying. Apex Air, Corp. "Operations. Urgent." Julian settled back into his seat, the picture of repose. "You're going to want to take that, Captain." The world seemed to slow down. Finch's heart hammered against his ribs as he answered the phone. "Captain Finch here." "Alistair, this is Operations Command. We're tracking a social media firestorm originating from your flight. There are over 60,000 people watching a live stream. 60,000. Whatever is happening, you need to de-escalate and resolve it. Quietly, now." 60,000 witnesses. Finch wiped a bead of sweat from his brow just as two airport security officers, Kim and Rodriguez, stepped onto the aircraft. They were all business, their hands already hovering near their restraints. "What's the situation, Captain?" Officer Kim asked, her eyes scanning the tense cabin. Chloe, emboldened by their presence, pointed a shaking finger at Julian. "This passenger has been hostile and disruptive for over 30 minutes. He's making threats against the crew and refuses to vacate a seat he doesn't belong in." Julian remained motionless, a sphinx in a sea of chaos. His eyes were the only active part of him, meticulously tracking every person, every camera, every witness. This wasn't a confrontation. It was a data-gathering exercise. "Sir," Kim addressed Julian, her voice firm, "we need you to gather your belongings and come with us, voluntarily." "I am in my assigned seat, for which I hold a valid boarding pass," Julian replied, his voice even. "I am not going anywhere." Rodriguez moved closer, his hand now resting on his zip ties. "Sir, you are interfering with the lawful duties of a flight crew. That is a federal offense. This is your last warning." 6 minutes to departure. The gate agent's voice echoed through the cabin again, now sounding strained. Maya's live stream chat was a blur of frantic messages. "Don't let them take him! This is a civil rights violation. Someone call the ACLU. Call CNN." Mr. Davenport in 1C finally exploded. "Captain, for God's sake, I paid $3,000 for this seat to avoid this exact kind of circus. I have a connecting flight to Tokyo." His outburst broke the dam, and other first-class passengers began to murmur their agreement, their desire for convenience overriding any sense of justice. "Sir," Officer Kim said, her voice brooking no argument, "this is your final opportunity to comply." Julian glanced at his watch, a gesture that was now universally understood as an act of profound defiance. "Officers, before you proceed with an unlawful arrest, I have one last question for you." "We're not here to answer your questions," Rodriguez snapped. "Are you familiar," Julian continued, undeterred, "with the concept of qualified immunity and the specific circumstances under which it is waived?" Kim paused. Her hand, which had been reaching for her cuffs, hesitated. That was lawyer speak. Not just any lawyer speak. That was the language of a civil rights attorney, highly specific, technical, and threatening. "He's trespassing," Finch interjected, trying to regain control. "Apex Air reserves the right to refuse service to any passenger at any time for any reason." "Actually," Julian said, reaching with deliberate slowness for his briefcase under the seat in front of him, "let's talk about those rights." Rodriguez's body went rigid. "Sir, no sudden movements. I am merely retrieving the documentation you requested," Julian said calmly, his hand reappearing with a slim, leather-bound portfolio. 5 minutes to departure. Finch's radio screeched. "Captain Finch, this is Operations Command again. The goddamn New York Times is on the line with our Media Relations Department. We need this situation contained, Alistair. Contained." National news. Finch could feel his 25-year career, his pension, his entire professional identity turning to dust in real time. But Chloe had never been wrong. He had to trust his crew. He had to. "What kind of documentation?" Kim asked. Her eyes narrowed with suspicion. "The kind that will clarify for you why forcibly removing me from this seat would be a career-ending, life-altering mistake for every single one of you," Julian replied. Chloe's voice climbed into the realm of hysteria. "He's been threatening us this whole time. He won't show us a proper ID. Just look at him. Does he look like someone who belongs in first class?" The question hung in the air, naked and ugly. "Ma'am," Kim said, choosing her words with extreme care. "What were the specific threats he made?" He said there would be consequences," she stammered. "He keeps looking at his watch, timing everything. He's planning something." Maya's viewer count hit 75,000. Prominent journalists and civil rights activists were now sharing her stream, adding their own commentary. Her phone was buzzing so intensely it felt like it might combust. 4 minutes to departure. Alistair Finch made the worst decision of his life. "Officers, remove him now. We cannot allow one unstable individual to hold 184 people hostage." Rodriguez moved in, zip ties in hand. "Sir, on your feet. Hands behind your back." Julian didn't move. Instead, he locked eyes with the captain. "Captain Finch, how many years have you been a pilot for Apex Air?" 25, Finch answered automatically, annoyed by the irrelevant question. "Officer Rodriguez, how many years have you been with airport security?" 10. "What does that have to do with anything?" "Because in 30 seconds, Julian said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, both of you are going to have to explain to your superiors why you chose to arrest the single most powerful man in the entire company." Finch's radio erupted in a squall of static. A new voice, older, colder, and filled with a level of authority Finch had never heard before, came on the line. "Captain Finch, this is Executive Vice President Davidson from corporate headquarters. I repeat, this is the EVP. We have a developing crisis. Stand by for executive-level instruction. I order you to stand down. Do not, under any circumstances, proceed with the passenger removal. Acknowledge." Executive. Vice. President. That was a name from the stratosphere of the company. A near mythical figure who answered only to the board of directors. "You're under arrest, sir," Rodriguez said, either not hearing or not comprehending the gravity of the radio call. He reached for Julian's arm. And for the first time, Julian stood. The entire cabin held its breath. Every phone camera was laser-focused on him. "Officers," he said quietly, his voice resonating with a strange sadness. "Years from now, you will use this moment as a cautionary tale in your training seminars. You will tell new recruits about the day you almost arrested your own boss, and you will stress the importance of asking the right questions before you draw the wrong conclusions." He reached into his leather portfolio. This time no one dared to stop him. He withdrew a single, heavy business card, embossed with a simple, elegant logo that few would recognize. "Before you place me in restraints," he said, "perhaps you should see my identification." Kim took the card, her hand extended reluctantly. She read it. All the color drained from her face, leaving a sickly, pale mask. Her jaw went slack. She stumbled back a step, showing the card to Rodriguez, whose own eyes widened in disbelief and horror. "What is it?" Finch demanded, his own voice cracking under the strain. "What does it say?" Officer Kim's whisper was barely audible, a ghost of a sound in the suddenly silent cabin. Julian Vance. Board of Directors, Apex Air. The words detonated in the cabin. Board member. Not a manager, not a vice president. A board member. One of the handful of individuals who governed the entire multi-billion-dollar corporation. High enough to end a career with a single email, but not so high as to be utterly unbelievable. Chloe's face crumpled as if she'd been struck. No, that's impossible. Board members don't fly on commercial flights. 2 minutes to departure. Finch's radio crackled again. It was the EVP's voice, now sharp with panic. Captain Finch, this is Davidson again. We are fully aware of the identity of the passenger in seat 2A. I need you to understand the gravity of this situation. Corporate is taking direct control. Do not take any further action against Mr. Vance. Julian sat back down, meticulously smoothing the jacket of his suit. He looked at Finch, his expression unreadable. Captain Finch, I believe you and your flight attendant had some concerns about my documentation. Alistair Finch felt 25 years of impeccable service, of pride, of authority, evaporate into nothing. He was no longer a captain. He was just a man who had made a catastrophic, career-ending mistake in front of 75,000 people. Sir, Mr. Vance, the crew, we had no way of knowing, he stammered. That, Julian said softly, the words landing with the force of a physical blow, is precisely the point. You didn't know, so you assumed. Your crew member assumed. And now, nearly 100,000 people have watched your assumptions play out in real time. Maya's livestream had indeed crested 100,000 viewers. The comments were a blur of shock, vindication, and fury. Board member, oh my God! They are so unbelievably fired. This is the most satisfying video I have ever watched. Rodriguez backed away, letting his unused zip ties fall from his nerveless fingers. Kim stared at the business card as if it were radioactive. Chloe had collapsed into an empty passenger seat, her body racked with deep, hyperventilating sobs. The full weight of her words, recorded, live-streamed, and witnessed by the entire world, crashed down upon her. It was 1 minute past their scheduled departure time. But no one on Flight 718 was thinking about departure anymore. Every soul in that cabin was fixated on the quiet, impeccably dressed black man in seat 2A, who had just systematically dismantled the lives of the crew with nothing more than a boarding pass and the truth. Julian Vance checked his watch one final time. I believe, he said to the petrified captain, we have several important matters to discuss before we arrive in Denver. The implications of that statement hung in the recycled air, a storm cloud waiting to burst. A profound, suffocating silence descended upon the cabin. It was the silence of a world turned upside down. Julian Vance, board member, sat in his rightful seat while 100,000 people watched the professional lives of Captain Finch and Chloe crumble into ash. Finch stared at the business card, still in Officer Kim's trembling hand. Board of Directors. The words refused to compute. Board members existed in mahogany-paneled rooms, in shareholder reports, in a distant universe of corporate power. They didn't occupy seat 2A on a Tuesday morning flight to Denver. Sir, Finch whispered, the word captain feeling like a lie in his mouth. If you are who you say you are, why didn't you identify yourself from the beginning? Julian looked up, and for the first time, a flicker of raw emotion, of profound weariness broke through his iron composure. Captain? He asked, the question sharp and pointed. Why should I have to? The 4 words landed like a physical punch. Why must I prove my right to exist in a space I have paid to occupy? The question struck Alistair Finch with the force of a revelation. He searched his memory, 25 years of flight logs, of passenger interactions. He had never, not once, demanded that a white passenger in a suit prove he belonged in first class. Ever. We have protocols, he stammered, the excuse sounding feeble even to his own ears. Whose protocol? Julian countered, his voice still low but now edged with steel. States that a black man in an expensive suit is inherently suspicious? Let's name the thing we are all dancing around, shall we? You saw the color of my skin, and you built a narrative of criminality. He said the word. Black. The unspoken truth that had charged the air for the last 40 minutes was finally given voice. Chloe's sobbing intensified into a desperate, panicked gasping. She understood. This wasn't a failure of customer service. It was a civil rights violation, recorded for posterity, live-streamed to a global audience. Her career wasn't just over. It was a historical footnote in a viral video about racism. Maya's live-stream chat went supernova. He said it! Calling out the racism directly to the captain's face. This is history being made. 120K viewers now. Julian reached for his tablet, his hands not quite as steady as before. The calm facade was cracking, revealing the immense strain he had been under. Officer Rodriguez, Julian said, his voice regaining its command. In your 10 years working security at this airport, how many white passengers have you physically restrained for sitting quietly in their assigned first-class seat? Rodriguez stared, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. Sir, that's not... How many? Julian pressed. 1? 2? None, Rodriguez admitted, the word barely a whisper. And how many black passengers? Rodriguez couldn't meet his eyes. He didn't have to. The grim mathematics of racial bias were undeniable, and now part of the public record. Julian tapped his tablet, and the screen came to life. It wasn't an email or a document. It was a live video call. The Apex Air boardroom materialized on the screen, a half-dozen grim-faced executives staring out from the device. Julian, a woman's voice, crisp and authoritative, emanated from the tablet. We're watching the feed. Are you okay? The faces of the flight crew went ashen. This wasn't just some anonymous board member. This was a man the other executives called by his first name, a man they were worried about. I'm unharmed, Patricia, Julian replied, his voice tight. Though I believe Captain Finch and flight attendant Chloe have some explaining to do to the rest of the board. Finch felt a wave of nausea. The entire executive leadership team of Apex Air was witnessing his humiliation. Live. Captain Finch, the woman on the screen said, her voice dripping with ice. This is Patricia Watkins, Senior Executive Vice President of Operations. Perhaps you could enlighten us as to why our chairman of the board is being threatened with arrest on one of his own airplanes. Chairman. Not just a board member. The chairman of the entire goddamn board of directors. The single most powerful person in the company besides the CEO himself. Alistair Finch felt his knees give way, and he had to grab the back of a seat to keep from collapsing. Chloe let out a small, strangled cry and curled into a fetal position. Rodriguez actually dropped his restraints, the plastic clattering loudly on the cabin floor. Madam Vice President, Finch stammered, his mind a whirlwind of panic. We had no identification. The crew reported a disturbance. The crew reported what exactly? Another voice from the tablet cut in. Older, male, radiating pure, undiluted power. This is CEO Robert Jordan. I want a precise, minute-by-minute accounting of why my chairman was treated like a common criminal. Maya's viewer count rocketed past 150,000. Her phone was now so hot she could barely hold it. News alerts from CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News were flashing across social media, all referencing her live stream. Julian turned the tablet to face Chloe. Ms. Martinez, he said, using her last name for the first time. Would you care to repeat to CEO Jordan what you said to me about people like me not belonging in first class? Chloe couldn't speak. She couldn't breathe. The crushing weight of having the entire executive team, the CEO, the chairman, witness her bigotry in real time was simply too much. Sir, Officer Kim finally found her voice, trying to salvage the situation for her and her partner. We were responding to a direct report from the flight crew about a disruptive and threatening passenger. Officer Kim, CEO Jordan's voice boomed from the tablet. We have access to at least 5 different video angles of this incident, thanks to social media. Mr. Vance was sitting quietly, reading his documents. What, precisely, was disruptive about his behavior? The flight attendant said. The flight attendant assumed, Julian interrupted, and now his voice was no longer calm. It was filled with the righteous fury he had held in check for nearly an hour. She assumed I didn't belong. She assumed my ticket was a forgery. She assumed I was hostile. Every single one of her assumptions was predicated on one and only one factor. He let the silence stretch, forcing everyone to confront the ugly truth. My appearance? The cabin was utterly silent, save for Chloe's ragged breathing. Julian tapped his tablet again. A new screen appeared, a dashboard of internal Apex Air communications, real-time messages flashing between executives, legal debt, mobilize class action defense team, PR debt, prepare crisis statement, anticipate 24-hour news cycle, finance, debt, initiate stock price monitoring protocol, anticipate significant drop on market open. The words on the screen were a corporate autopsy in progress. Ladies and gentlemen, Julian said, his voice projecting through the entire cabin. For those of you still recording, what you are witnessing is the real-time anatomy of a corporate crisis. This is how quickly a single employee's assumption becomes a federal lawsuit. This is how prejudice becomes a headline. This is how bigotry becomes a stock price catastrophe. As if on cue, Finch's radio crackled. Captain Finch, this is Denver Tower. Be advised, we have 17 news helicopters holding in a pattern around Denver International. The FAA is on the line demanding immediate preliminary incident reports. You are instructed to complete your departure without further delay. 17 news helicopters. This was no longer an airline incident. This was a national event. Captain, CEO Jordan's voice commanded from the tablet. You will get that aircraft in the air. Now, Mr. Vance will remain in his seat. The seat he paid for. Upon your arrival in Denver, you and your flight attendant will report directly to a corporate security team, who will escort you to headquarters. Do you understand? Yes, sir, Finch croaked. Ms. Martinez, the CEO continued, you will not speak another word to any passenger or crew member. Our head of HR will be meeting you at the gate. Chloe nodded mutely, tears carving clean tracks through her makeup. Officers, the CEO finished, your departments will be receiving formal complaints from our legal team within the hour. I suggest you contact your union representatives immediately. Julian swiped the screen, ending the call. The executives vanished, but their spectral presence lingered like a toxic gas. Now, Julian said, standing once more, let me show you all something else. He opened his briefcase wider. Inside, visible to the nearby passengers and their ever-present cameras, were neatly organized folders. He pulled one out. The label read, Class Action Lawsuit Template, Airline Discrimination, Vance vs. Apex Air. He pulled out another. Financial Analysis, Revenue Impact of Public Discrimination Incidents, and a third, Training Manual Draft, Unconscious Bias in Customer-Facing Roles. I did not board this flight by accident, Captain, Julian said, his voice low and intense. Apex Air has received 47 credible discrimination complaints in the last fiscal quarter alone. 47. This was a stress test. The words landed like an electrical shock. This was a setup, a sting operation, an orchestrated piece of corporate theater designed to fail in the most spectacular way possible. You planned this? Finch asked, his voice filled with disbelief. I plan to fly first class on my own airline, which I do several times a month. Your crew, Julian said, his eyes boring into Chloe, planned the discrimination. And you, Captain, planned the escalation. I simply planned to document the outcome. Maya's livestream hit 170,000 viewers. The comments were scrolling too fast to read. It was a test. The chairman set up his own airline. This is the most brilliant thing I have ever seen. Julian pulled out his phone. On the screen was a drafted press release, complete with the Apex Air logo. The headline read, Apex Air announces landmark anti-discrimination initiative following chairman's personal experience with in-flight bias. This press release goes live the moment we land, he said. It announces mandatory, recurring implicit bias training for every single one of our 80,000 employees. It announces the formation of a third-party, independent ethics board to review all customer complaints. And it announces the establishment of a $10 million fund to develop new technologies for preventing discrimination. He looked directly at Chloe, whose sobbing had turned into silent, convulsive shudders. Ms. Martinez, your assumptions today just cost this company $10 million. She looked up, her face a mask of utter ruin. But, Julian continued, his voice softening slightly, they also just purchased us the opportunity to become the first airline in America to have a zero-tolerance discrimination policy that is backed by real, tangible consequences. Finch finally found his voice. Sir, what happens to us? Julian studied the broken captain for a long, silent moment. That, Captain Finch, depends entirely on whether you choose to learn from this moment or be destroyed by it. He sat back down, opened his laptop, and began to type, the rhythmic clicking of the keys the only sound in the stunned cabin. I am documenting everything that happened here today, he said, without looking up. Every word, every assumption, every moment of bias. It is going to become Chapter 1 of the required training manual for every employee who works for this company. The plane finally began its taxi to the runway, 37 minutes late. As it lifted into the air, Julian's voice once again filled the cabin, calm and clear. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Apex Air Flight 718, the flight that changes everything. As the skyline of Denver appeared through the windows, Julian made one final call. Legal, it's Julian. Execute the protocol, full implementation, and schedule me a meeting with the NAACP, the ACLU, and the Secretary of Transportation. We're going to fix this entire industry. The test was over. The real work was about to begin. What would you have done if you were a passenger on that flight? Would you have recorded, spoken up, or looked away? Let me know in the comments. Your answer says more about you than you might think. The cabin air crackled with an invisible energy as Flight 718 descended. Julian Vance closed his laptop with a quiet, definitive click. Ms. Martinez, he said, his voice cutting through the nervous whispers. Come here. Sit down. Chloe, looking like a ghost, stumbled to seat 2B, across the aisle from him. Her hands shook so violently she had to clutch them together in her lap. Every phone in first class swiveled to capture her face, pale, tear-streaked, utterly broken. Look at me, Julian commanded. It wasn't a request. Chloe forced her gaze up from the floor to meet his. What she saw wasn't the righteous anger she expected. It was something far worse. A profound, soul-weary disappointment that felt like a physical blow. 8 years, Julian began, his voice a quiet indictment. You have worked for this company for 8 years. You have sat through 15 mandatory discrimination training modules and dozens of diversity and inclusion workshops. And yet, 45 minutes ago, you looked at a black man in a $3,000 suit and your brain immediately served up the word criminal. "Sir, I'm so sorry. I am not finished." The words sliced through her apology like ice. "Do you happen to know what the stock price of Apex Air was when we took off from the gate this morning?" Chloe shook her head, a single tear tracing a path through her ruined makeup. $48.12 per share, Julian said, holding up his phone to show a real-time stock ticker. "And do you know what it is projected to be at market open tomorrow, once this story has saturated the 24-hour news cycle?" He swiped the screen. A financial analyst's projection appeared. Apex, projected opening, $44.50, down 7.5%. Your assumptions, Ms. Martinez, have just vaporized approximately $950 million in shareholder value. Maya's live stream, now being broadcast by major news networks, exploded with comments. "Holy crap! She cost them almost $1 billion. This is the most expensive act of racism in history." "Captain Finch," Julian called out, not turning his head. "Join us, please." Finch emerged from the cockpit, his immaculate uniform now appearing rumpled and ill-fitting. His face was the color of ash. 25 years of heroic landings in thunderstorms and calm management of engine failures, and his legacy would be this single catastrophic failure of character. "Captain," Julian asked, his tone deceptively mild, "in your 25 years of service, can you give me an estimate of how many black passengers you have personally authorized for removal from a premium cabin?" Finch's mouth was a desert. "Sir, I don't keep statistics based on race." "I do," Julian said, pulling up a new document on his tablet. It was an internal audit from the Flight Operations Division. In the past 3 years, Captain Alistair Finch has authorized the removal of 19 passengers from first or business class for non-compliant behavior. 17 of those 19 were people of color. The 2 who were white had been physically aggressive. The other 17 had not. The numbers hung in the air, a statistical confirmation of a systemic disease. Finch felt his legs tremble. He had to grip a seat back to stay upright. "Is that a coincidence, Captain?" I never realized," he whispered. "You never realized because you never questioned," Julian shot back. "Ms. Martinez tells you a black passenger is disruptive, and you don't demand a single specific example of the disruption. She tells you someone doesn't belong, and you don't ask for the basis of that judgment. You simply accept her bias as your fact. And then you act." Julian stood, his 6'3" frame commanding the attention of the entire aircraft. His voice rose, carrying to the last row of economy, where passengers were standing on seats to get a better view of the drama unfolding. "Ladies and gentlemen," he boomed, "what you are all witnessing today is the machinery of institutional racism. It's not always the cross-burning, hood-wearing cartoon villainy you see in movies. More often it's this: the polite kind, the quiet kind, the kind that cloaks itself in the language of protocol and safety, the kind that allows good people to participate in evil by simply refusing to question the assumptions of the person standing next to them." Chloe's desperate gasps intensified. She understood now. This wasn't just about her job or her mortgage. This was about the poisoned bedrock of her own worldview, a foundation she had never thought to examine. Julian's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and a grim, knowing smile touched his lips. "Ms. Martinez, do you know who that was?" She shook her head numbly. "That was a text from my chief legal counsel. He informs me that the law offices of Ben Crump and Gloria Allred have just issued a joint press release. They are seeking plaintiffs for a class action lawsuit representing every passenger of color who has been unjustly removed from an Apex Air flight in the past 5 years." The last vestiges of color drained from Chloe's face. How many people is that?" "Based on a preliminary review of our internal complaints," Julian said, consulting his tablet. Approximately 3,200. The average settlement value in federal airline discrimination cases is around $400,000 per plaintiff. Maya, still live streaming, did the math out loud for her audience. That's $1.28 billion in potential legal exposure. Precisely, Julian affirmed. Ms. Martinez, your 30 minutes of unchecked bias have just exposed this company to the largest and most expensive discrimination lawsuit in the history of modern aviation. Finch finally found his voice, a desperate plea. Sir, please, what can we do to fix this? Julian's laugh was a bitter, hollow sound. Captain, there is no we. We ended the moment you decided I was guilty until proven innocent. You made your choice. Please, sir, Finch begged, his pride utterly shattered. I have a family, a mortgage. I'll lose my pension. I'll lose everything. So did the 3,200 people you and your colleagues have publicly shamed and humiliated over the last 5 years, Julian replied, his voice devoid of sympathy. Did you take a moment to consider their families, their mortgages, their pensions, when you had them escorted off planes like criminals? Finch had no answer. Julian pulled up one last document on his screen. Apex Air Crisis Management Protocol. Level 1, Existential Threat. He read a highlighted section aloud. In the event of a public discrimination incident with potential legal liability exceeding $100 million, the company will immediately terminate all involved personnel without severance to demonstrate to shareholders and the public a zero-tolerance policy and a firm commitment to corporate values. Chloe's voice was a ragged crack. You're firing us? I am not firing anyone, Julian said coldly. The board of directors will vote on your termination at an emergency session that is scheduled to begin in 90 minutes. As chairman, I will be recommending immediate dismissal with cause. That means no severance package, no benefits, no positive references. Blacklisted. The words landed like punches. Chloe doubled over, struggling to breathe. Finch looked like a man who had just watched his own home burn to the ground. However, Julian continued, letting a single sliver of light into their darkness. There is one, and only one, possible path to mitigation. Both crew members looked up, their eyes wide with a desperate animal hope. A full, unscripted public confession, a live television interview tonight with a journalist of my choosing. A complete and total acknowledgement of your bias and your actions, followed by a binding commitment to become public advocates for civil rights and anti-discrimination training throughout the entire airline industry. You want us to go on national television and destroy our own reputations? Finch asked, aghast. You destroyed my dignity in front of 170,000 people and counting, Julian retorted. I'm offering you a chance to rebuild your character in front of millions. It's a generous offer. Take it or leave it. The plane began its final approach into Denver. Through the windows, they could see the flashing lights of news vans and police cars assembled near the terminal, a grim welcoming committee. 30 minutes to landing, Finch announced, the words spoken automatically from a lifetime of habit. 30 minutes to decide the rest of your lives, Julian corrected him. Choose wisely. The thud of the landing gear on the runway was a sound of finality. Through her small window, Chloe could see her future waiting on the tarmac, a gauntlet of cameras, federal investigators, and the public end of the life she had spent 8 years building. Decision time, Julian said, not looking up from his tablet. Anderson Cooper's producers are on the line. They're offering you the first block of their show tonight. The whole world is waiting to hear your story. Chloe's voice was a choked whisper. What if I can't? What if I break down and say the wrong thing? For the first time since the ordeal began, Julian's expression softened, a flicker of empathy breaking through the chairman's armor. Ms. Martinez, do you have children? A daughter, she whispered. She's 7. What story do you want her to hear about this day, years from now? Julian asked quietly. The story of the mother who made a terrible mistake and then hid in shame? Or the story of the mother who made a terrible mistake, owned it completely, and dedicated her life to making sure no one else ever had to feel the way she made me feel today? Chloe wiped her eyes, a flicker of resolve hardening her features. That people can change, she said. That one mistake doesn't have to be the end of your story. Then that, Julian said, is what you tell the cameras. Finch went through the post-landing shutdown sequence, his hands, which had guided jumbo jets through hurricanes, shaking like leaves. Sir, he said, turning to Julian, I need to tell you something. This wasn't the first time. I've done this before, not this bad, but I've made assumptions, judgments, about passengers who looked different. I told myself it was professional intuition. Julian looked at the broken captain, his gaze steady. What you called intuition, Alistair, was just your prejudice wearing a uniform. The use of his first name was more damning than any insult. My own son is mixed race, Finch confessed, the words tearing out of him. My God, what if another pilot, another crew, treated him the way I treated you today? The self-incriminating horror of it washed over him, a tidal wave of shame. Then you, more than anyone, have a deeply personal reason to make this right, Julian said quietly. The aircraft door hissed open, and the chaos of the world poured in. A team of stern-faced people in suits, clearly federal investigators, boarded first, followed by Apex executives and a phalanx of lawyers. An inspector from the Department of Transportation approached with grim efficiency. Mr. Vance, I'm Inspector General Torres. We are opening a federal civil rights investigation. We will require immediate, separate statements from all parties involved. Inspector, Julian said, holding up a hand. Before you begin, I want you to see something. He angled his tablet to show Torres the screen. At the top was a title. The Flight 718 Protocol, a case study in the eradication of institutional bias. I've been developing this comprehensive training and accountability program for the past 6 months, waiting for an incontrovertible public case study to launch it. Today, Captain Finch and Ms. Martinez provided me with that case study. Torres's eyes widened as he scanned the detailed proposal. You were planning this. I was preparing for this, Julian corrected. There is a significant difference. Chloe found her voice, asking the question that had been burning in her mind. Sir, Mr. Vance, can I ask you something personal? Julian nodded. How many times has this happened to you? On other flights, with other airlines? The real number. Julian was silent for a long moment, the sounds of the deplaning passengers fading into the background. Ms. Martinez, I am a black man in America who flies over 200,000 miles a year for business. It has happened more times than I can count. The sideways glances, the random security checks, the demands for extra identification, the quiet whispers. The only thing different about today, he said, his eyes sweeping over the cabin, over Maya and her still recording phone, is that today I had the power to make it stop. Not just for me, for everyone. Maya looked up from her phone, which now showed a staggering 250,000 concurrent viewers. Mr. Vance, people in my stream are asking, will this really change anything? Or is this just another news cycle that will be forgotten in a week? Julian offered a rare, genuine smile. Maya, in the next 60 minutes, Apex Air will announce the most sweeping, aggressive, and well-funded anti-discrimination program in aviation history. We are investing $50 million. We are mandating body cameras for all in-cabin crew. We are instituting a fully independent third-party auditing system with the power to unilaterally fire any employee at any level found to have engaged in discriminatory behavior. Zero tolerance, with immediate and permanent termination. He then turned to look at Chloe and Finch. And the public faces of this new initiative, our first 2 case studies in redemption, will be sitting right here. Case studies? Finch asked, his voice trembling. You two, Julian explained, will spend the next year of your lives employed by Apex Air. Your job will be to travel to every single one of our hubs, from Anchorage to Miami. You will stand in front of every new pilot, every new flight attendant, every gate agent, and you will tell them your story. You will show them the video. You will explain, in excruciating detail, how your own unexamined bias led to this moment. You will become living, breathing cautionary tales. Chloe's tears had finally stopped. For the first time in hours, a flicker of something that looked like hope appeared in her eyes. You're giving us a chance to fix this. I'm giving you a chance to earn redemption, Julian corrected. It will be the hardest thing you ever do. You will relive this humiliation 1,000 times. You will face hostile audiences. Many people will never forgive you. But my son will see me trying, Finch said, squaring his shoulders. And my daughter will see that her mother is a woman who makes things right. As the last passengers deplaned, Julian stood at the cabin door. Ladies and gentlemen, he said to the departing crowd, today you witnessed something unprecedented, a live real-time dissection of how discrimination happens and how it can be stopped. He paused, looking out at the sea of news cameras on the tarmac. In 12 months, I promise you, Apex Air will be the safest, most equitable airline in America for every single passenger, regardless of their race, religion, or background. Not because we are perfect, but because we are finally willing to be honest about our imperfections. Outside, protesters were already gathering, their chants for justice mixing with the roar of jet engines. This was no longer just a story about Apex Air. It was a national conversation about bias, power, accountability, and the slim, hopeful possibility of change. Chloe took a deep, shuddering breath and walked down the jet bridge, not toward the HR representatives, but toward the bank of cameras. Her career as a flight attendant was over. Her life's work, it seemed, was just beginning. Finch followed a step behind her, thinking not of his lost pension, but of his mixed-race son, and of the kind of world he wanted to leave for him. Julian Vance stepped out into the bright Denver sun, carrying the weight of systemic change on his shoulders. The flight was over. The transformation had just begun. 6 months later, the Flight 718 protocol would be adopted as the industry standard by every major airline in the United States. Sometimes justice doesn't just arrive. Sometimes it has to be manufactured with surgical precision at 30,000 feet. And if you believe that kind of justice is worth fighting for, then you know what to do. Subscribe, share this story, because the next revolution might just be live-streamed from a seat near you.